Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, the Urbana Socialist Forum, or, as we like to say on this show, UPTV. Whose views are these? Well, these views are our own, and by our in this instance, I mean myself and my guest, who I hope will introduce himself right now.
Hi, everybody. I am Fardin. I am a grad student, PhD student in the Department of Computer Science, UOI. And I'm here tonight to have a nice conversation about whatever comes up.
Well, welcome. So, computer science. What does that entail? What are you coding? You're learning how to code machines, or you're learning how to build machines? Is it more like engineering, or is it a bit of both? Is it everything?
Yeah, I think it's part of the engineering that, I don't know, for some reason they called it science. Not really a different science, just a major of engineering. But yeah, I think most of computer scientists are pretty good coders, but they're usually also pretty good at math. And they work on different aspects of software, sometimes a little bit of the hardware. And depending on different areas, they do different things. I specifically focus on building safety critical software. So basically building software for systems that cannot tolerate any sort of crash, like airplanes, medical systems, cars, and making sure if there's a bug in the software, it will not result in a catastrophic failure, it will not harm people and the environment around those machines.
Oh, I never... I guess if I had ever thought about it, I would think that that was something somebody actually consciously tried to do, but I guess I never really thought about it. So on your average piece of software, like, say, a mail program that allows you to do email or something like that, if that crashes, well, you just can't do email.
Exactly.
It just doesn't work. Like, let's restart it. But if your
heart pacemaker fails,
you don't want that to happen. So how do you make it so that, how can you make it, if it doesn't work, that it keeps working? I don't get that. Is it like a secondary system that kicks in?
There's a ton of ways, I can give you an example, right?
Sure.
So, for example, in the Boeing, I think, airplanes, every processor, there's actually 2 duplicates of every processor. So there's 3 of them, which means that if one of them fails, like by failure, it means like does something wrong.
Yeah.
The 3 will be out of consensus, and then the 2 that have the majority, the result that's produced by 2 of them would be taken and would be like applied to the wings or whatever they are.
So it's a redundancy.
That's one simple technique, right? But just to give a sense of like what those techniques may look like. But there's a ton of other ways, and that they don't have redundancy. Some of them are just like timing redundancy. So, there's a whole PhD to get in.
Well, obviously you can't explain it all here and now, and I probably wouldn't understand a lot of it. But that's really interesting. Well, how did you become interested in doing this in the first place?
How did I become interested in
video
doing
games when you were a little kid? You were like,
to be honest, not really. Actually, I did a lot of games in high school. But since I entered college, I did not play any computer games until recently. So, to me, I think like I've always thought of programming as a superpower, because it's one of the few things that you can do almost everything with it. Like there aren't really that many things that give such a power and such a flexibility to you to be able to turn whatever is in your mind into something that works. So that's literally how I think about it. And I did my undergrad in electrical engineering, and I kind of was tired of being limited, like doing like a whole, spending your whole lifetime on just focusing on improving something small versus like in computer science, you actually can build systems that do everything. Like you have an idea, you want to build a website that does this, just do it, and you can do it. You have the tools. But there's not that many other things that does that. So yeah, that's how I decided to do my graduate school.
So it's more creative. It allows for more creativity.
and powerful. I mean, that's how I became interested.
Well, that's cool. I always wonder what drives people. Like, before the show we were talking, and I was telling you that I spent most of my life being a musician. That was something I just knew that's what I was going to do. I mean, when I was like 11 or 12, I was just like, if you had asked me when I was just a little kid, what are you going to do? I'd say, well, I'm going to be a musician. I'm going to be a rock star or whatever. You know, I just knew it. I never had any doubt. And it was always interesting to me to hear people say, well, I'm not really sure what I want to do once I graduate. You know, they just don't really have a direction. I wonder, like, because everything I did was focused on that goal, you know, at that time in my life. And so it's just interesting to me how people arrive at what they're going to do, you know, how you get there from just being a kid.
For example, I think it was 3 weeks ago, I'm from Iran, so my mother tongue is Persian. My girlfriend is American, so she doesn't know how to speak Persian, but she's trying to learn it. A few days ago, and you know, for Persian script, we use Arabic alphabet, which is kind of, you know, if you're not from that region, like you only know the Latin alphabet.
Right.
A lot of dictionaries that you can find online, they translate the words from English to Persian or Farsi in the Arabic alphabet. So you can't even read the translated word if you are not familiar with the alphabet.
Okay.
So for the beginners, it's really hard to actually start learning Farsi because like there's really nothing to start from that. So a few weeks ago, we were sitting in a coffee shop, and my girlfriend asked me about that. She was like, do you know any website any dictionaries that when I put a word in, it doesn't give me the Farsi in the Farsi script. Rather, it gives me in Finglish. That's what we call when you write Farsi with the Latin alphabet.
Right.
And I searched around. I said, there should be something, right? I mean, it's something that probably a lot of people needed, and then there wasn't. So I just said, you know what? I'm just going to make one. So I just made one like that. I spent that whole day in the coffee shop until night, and I made one. Like, it's online now for people who want to use it. But that's what I mean. Like superpower. Like seriously, it's really a superpower. Like, and that's why I like it. Yeah.
Well, this is ignorant of me, but I always thought that Farsi and Persian were two different languages.
No, actually, they are the same language. They're two names for the same language.
Oh, okay.
Basically, the ancient name was Parsi for Persian in our language.
Right.
Then when this is like 1500 years ago.
Yeah.
And then when the Islam came to Iran, and basically the Arabic, like Islamic culture dominated, was mixed in, and we started using the Arabic alphabet. Because in the Arabic scripture, there's no P. There's no character for P.
Oh, okay.
So they couldn't write Parsi. So they wrote it Farsi. And that's how, like, the name of the language changed to Farsi. But in English, because I assume the word Persian comes from the Greek version of it, Perse or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's why, like, in English is Persian, or like they also call Iran Persia. Persia. But in like now we say it Farsi, or like the older version of it Parsi. But basically, yeah, there are two names for the same language.
That's interesting. And it's also interesting to me that of the people that I've met from Iran, almost every one of them has said that they're Persian. I don't think I've ever met anyone, and I'm not talking like a huge number of people, like maybe half a dozen. They all say, well, I'm Persian. And then they say Iran, and nobody says, I'm Iranian, first.
It's interesting. There are two things about that. One is that, I'm Iranian. So Persian actually means, like in a general sense, some people look at it as like just Iranian, but also in Iran, it's an ethnicity. Because,
okay,
for example,
okay.
in Iran, we have Turkish Iranians, we have Kurdish Iranians,
That's true.
we have Arab Iranians, we have Turkmen Iranians, and we have Persian Iranians. So I am actually, my mother tongue is Turkish because
Okay.
I'm from northwest of Iran. My hometown is like 2 hours from Turkey. And like when I talk to my mom, I talk to her in Turkish.
Okay.
So I like almost never I would call myself, like if somebody asks, are you Persian? I would say, I'm Iranian, but I'm Turkish Iranian. Like,
Okay.
so some people like that's one kind of differentiation. But also, I think there's a little bit of a political root to calling yourself Persian rather than Iranian, and that goes back to the 1979 and the hostage crisis of Iran. That being Iranian was associated with a very negative. There was a negative association, so a lot of the Iranians who were in Iran, in US at the time, started calling themselves Persian.
Okay.
And I think that maybe still exists, but
that might explain it. Yeah, that makes sense because you're here in the U.S. and so you're conscious of the potential negative connotations of saying Iranian to some people.
Yeah.
And so rather than, bring it up like that, you just kind of work around it, and then they don't. That makes sense. Is it? Were you around here back then in the 70s?
No, not that old.
Not old. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm 26.
So. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Well, I go back a long way, and so if you'd said, "Sure, yeah, I was here," then I would have. Okay, never mind. Sorry, but I'm not good at judging age either. If you'd asked me to guess how old you are, I would not have had any idea.
Not at all. Like you would say under 30.
I probably would have guessed 30s or 40s.
Wow. Okay, man. I need to consider my haircut or like
maybe,
shave more often.
Yeah. Get some baggy jeans, and wear your hat on sideways, something like that. Something more kid friendly. No, I'm just not good. I don't think like that. Anyway, so you were not around back then. So how long have you been here?
So I came to United States in 2011.
Oh, okay.
So like five and a half years ago. I finished my undergrad in Iran, in University of Tehran, and then I basically got a scholarship from UI. So that's why I chose to come here. And 5.5 years.
Okay.
So it's been a long 5.5 years. I've been only able to go back to home once, like 3.5 years ago, because of the visa complications of Iranians in the United States. Right. Can talk about that too, but so.
Well, I mean, this show is about immigration, so it's definitely that's a pertinent topic in terms of what is the complication of being here as someone having come from somewhere else. Is basically something that we talk about a lot because there are a lot of myths about immigrants and people from other countries. I think partly this is the case because the U.S. is such a big, geographically large space that it's very easy for people to live here and never leave the country. You can do a lot of traveling and never leave the country, and you can never meet anybody from another country. You could just travel around and everybody speaks English. Everybody has, eats the same hot dogs or whatever. There's a provincial quality to Americans, I think, that they aren't aware of because they don't have to be. They're not constantly confronted with their ignorance about other places. Whereas when you're from somewhere else and you come here, you're very aware of how much more you know about the world than they do, the people you meet.
I agree with you and also disagree with you because a lot of people know about U.S.
Yeah.
But for example, how many people in Iran know about, Indonesia? How many people in Iran know about, Vietnam? Not many,
really?
or vice versa. And like this relationship of knowing about other places usually in the third world countries is about like U.S. and some European countries, and not about other places. So I don't know if
really?
Yeah, and I mean, well, usually you know also about your neighbor countries. Like for example, I'm from Iran and I'm Turkish Iranian, so I know a lot about Turkey and Azerbaijan and like countries that culturally I also associate with. But usually like people from other countries knowing about U.S. is not because they actively went and read and researched about it, but also it's because just like you can when you're watching movie, you have watched a ton of American movies or TV shows.
Yeah.
Like in fact, I watched at least I finished at least like 5 or 6 full shows, long like 6-7 season shows before even coming here.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like Friends, How I Met Your Mother, and like Lost, a bunch of others.
That's funny. I've never seen any of those.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So you're more culturally attuned to America than I am.
Which actually, that's also another funny story because I don't know if you have any of these shows, how they are, like how they look like. But
I know something about them. I just have never watched.
When you watch this stuff before coming to US, they give you a perception of like how actually United States looks like. It's just so different from when you actually come in here.
I can imagine.
Yeah, like there's a lot of aspects of it. Like for example, most of those shows, like you never actually like the image you get from those shows is a white America.
Yes.
You never actually see like any of the minorities. Maybe you see also African Americans in a limited numbers in the shows, but you come here and you actually see the huge number of Asian Americans, a huge number of Latino Americans, which you never knew. Like for example, I think the show How I Met Your Mother, that's in New York. That happens in New York. And when you go to New York, actually, like you go to Queens, you go to like the whole Chinatown, you go to like the whole halal food scene in at nights in all the food carts.
Oh yeah.
Like I mean, it's really different. It's really different. Or Chicago, like and it's actually, if you hadn't seen those shows and came to US, you probably would have less culture shock than when you see those and then you come here.
Oh, really? Okay. So your expectation, it's so different from your expectation that it's a big shock, but just coming here wouldn't have been so strange?
Would have been definitely, like you definitely would have had like some culture shock. But
some degree, but
that
not
increases that amount because maybe I'm a bit exaggerating, but that certainly also helps for knowing some aspects of the country and the culture. But for example, like cities in the United States, right? Like the image I had of cities in US are these packed, dense, tall downtowns. But in fact, there's only few of the big cities in US who have that characteristics.
Yeah, that deep urban thing,
mostly like very wide and not very tall downtowns. I mean, except Chicago and New York, that's they're like if you go to Texas or I don't know, Midwest, other cities in Midwest, or it's like compared to, for example, cities in China. Or even Iran, for example, Tehran. I mean, it's very different. But anyhow, yeah. So I was saying that I and a lot of people around get to know U.S. because of the cultural material that's available, like from U.S. that's produced in U.S. and is consumed in other parts of the world. And it's not that you do consume them because you're actively looking for them. It's just everybody watches movies and shows, and most of the good ones happen to be American, for example, right? So then you just unconsciously get to know a lot about U.S. So that's why, like, I hear this a lot. People talk about Americans as having like cultural ignorance. I do not agree with that. I mean, definitely there are like cases and like ranges, but on average, I do not think that people in U.S. are less culturally like aware of the other cultures than people in other places are.
Okay.
In fact, because of the variety that you can experience in the United States, like because of the diversity that you can experience in like going to school in U.S., You get to know a lot about other aspects of other cultures, other countries. You get to have friends from other countries. Maybe I think like Europe might be more diverse than US because of the whole like no borders thing, and like every city has a lot of like people from different nationalities. But I think other than Europe, probably US would be the most diverse country. I can't imagine of any other place in the US that's more diverse. But I think in also US you have this different cities that have like, you know, you can go to like places that there's a very uniform population versus cities like, I don't know, Champaign that have like super mixed populations because of the school or the type of industries that are there. But I think in most cases, if from my experience for college kids, there is a lot of opportunities to know about other cultures, about other countries, just by going to college and having classmates and friends that are from other countries and getting to know about those.
Have you traveled much within the U.S. since you've been here?
Yeah, like because I can't go out of the U.S. really, so I've
going out,
Yeah,
so you're traveling.
The complications of visa I was talking about. So yeah, I travel like pretty much to a lot of most of the states, except maybe like a few. But I try to see the South, West.
Have you targeted particular areas like, I have to see San Francisco, or I need to see New Orleans, that kind of thing? Or has it just been kind of more situational, like, hey, my friends are going here, do you want to come with us? Sure. You know,
it's been mostly the second one, but like usually we try to pick places that we haven't been before. So that's why I've been like to South, West. I mean, like, you know, I've covered most of the country. But I can tell you this about the United States, like my experience of traveling here. Like where I live in Iran, my hometown, if you just drive 4 hours in any direction, actually, north, south, west, or east, you're going to end up in a region that is either a different country, so they either speak a different language, they might have it, like 4 or 5 hours north, you get to Armenia. It's a Christian country, they speak Christian, so they speak Armenian. If you drive 4 hours west, you're in Turkey or Iraq, depending on the color. So they might speak Kurdish or Turkish or Arabic. They have a different religion. The clothing looks different. The language is different. Even the nature. Like you drive 5 or 6 hours to east, you end up in like the warmer parts of Iran. So like the diversity, the cultural diversity, I think, is different than the type of diversity you get in U.S. In U.S., I think there is diversity, but on average, you see that diversity pretty much all around. But you go from here to, for example, all the way south of U.S., like to New Orleans. You still see diversity, but like from my past experience, this amount of diversity is not actually that much, you know. I don't know how to call it. Maybe it's not diversity. The difference between Midwest and South isn't as big compared to, for example, Iran. When you drive like from north of Iran to south of Iran. That's why I've kind of gotten a little bit bored of, you know, going around like visiting different cities in U.S. because most of them look similar. Like you get this similar type of food. Maybe you get some foods that are better in some areas and not as good in other areas, but still like you get them all everywhere. So I've recently been like more traveling towards like natural places, visiting you know, national parks and state parks and
That's an interesting point, because I think what passes for diversity here in the U.S. is something that's really very different from what actual diversity would be. And you make a good point. I've spoken to a lot of friends in Europe about the same thing. Like if you go in any direction, you're in another country, and they have a different language, different culture, different clothing, different, you know, all this stuff. Here, it seems like people, the slightest difference is enough for them to say, oh, those guys are really different, you know. They're darker, or they're lighter, or they have this, you know, kind of hair, or I can hardly understand them when they talk, even though they're speaking the same language. It's just an accent. It's not even a different language. It's just a different accent. So it's almost like there's more tension about diversity here when in fact there's a lot less of it than you would get in other places where they are more extreme. Like culture is different, the clothes are different, the religion is different, the do's and don'ts are very different in these different places. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point.
I remember reading an article about the reason for having like why I don't know how to put this, but what causes that kind of basically difference in places like Europe or like Middle East versus US. And basically that article was talking about this, that the places that people have been there for longer, for example in Iran for like thousands of years, right?
Oh yeah.
And in the past the mobility was limited, like people didn't have cars, or like there wasn't as much access to traveling around, so people were very limited in how far they can go and how fast they can go. So that's why you could see like villages or towns next to each other, that each one of them developed different food recipes and different languages even, or clothing cultures and traditions. Versus like in US, like since it's been founded, it's been mostly in the time that you had access to trains and like horses and mails. So culture has always been like mixed up. If there was barbecue in the South, like within a few years, that also came to Midwest, and like as much as the mobility allowed people to do. So that's why like here there is diversity. I'm not saying there's no diversity, but it's just like it's not that different from one place to another place.
Yeah, I agree.
Compared to Europe, for example, or so yeah. But it's a place.
Well, yeah, that's a good.
Interesting,
that makes a good point. This is a very young country. There have been people here for a long time, but they were mostly killed and had despoiled, I guess you might say, if you wanted to be nice about it. So those cultures are marginalized and shoved off into very limited spaces, and the sort of the what constitutes American culture is pretty young, just a couple hundred years max, I think, and so it's still forming, and it'll be interesting to see where it ends up someday, if we last that long. I don't know. At this rate, I'm not so sure, but we'll see. But it is fascinating to me to get your perspective on these things, because I see everything in one way because I've been here, and I've traveled around a lot too, and I have the same kind of thing. I spent most of my life traveling, and really what was interesting to me, as you mentioned, were the natural differences. Like it's plains around here, then there's desert over here, there are mountains there. That became what interested me about going to new places, more than meeting the people there, who were always just slightly different versions of the same thing that I found anywhere else. So in the sense of people in the U.S., for the most part, the differences are greater between social classes, like rich people live one way and poor people live another way, than they are regionally. There just aren't very big differences regionally. Yeah. And there are some ethnic differences in different, ethnic enclaves, but there aren't too many of those. Those are hard to, they're not set up in the same way, like a touristy sort of way. They're very, they are literally closed to people that live there. They're local spaces.